Meeting. It is September 20th, 2023, and the time is 9 a.m. I'm calling this meeting to order. In attendance are Commissioners Brooks, Matari, and Duncan. Are there any changes to the agenda? I might just suggest that we move item 3 to the end, and that way we have time to discuss. I do have a hard out at 10:30, but hopefully we can get through everything before then. So, item 1, PMR location. This is an action item because the board could choose to select a commissioner to enter into negotiations with the site if we decide after today's tour that that's what we want to do. So everybody familiar with the Chinook building on Ironwood? It's 980 Ironwood. It's there's pediatrics in there and all kinds of stuff there. So any thoughts on that? They'll be giving tours from 2:30 to 3:30 today. So if any of the elected officials wanted to come, they could do that. And Brandy, you've been there already? Okay. So Brandy's been there. And then what I figured we could do is if the commissioners wanted to, we could just have it contingent upon the tour today. And then if we decided that that was not a suitable location, then we would not go ahead with negotiation, if that makes sense. So, thoughts? Stan?
This is where I take my kids for pediatric appointments, so I'm assuming it all looks pretty similar. I think it's a great location.
Yeah, it's a good location.
Jennifer, thoughts?
Yeah, if I can't go, Grace, I have a meeting with the Supreme Court, but I think
Okay.
Brenda's already told me that.
Okay. Perfect. All right.
And
Sure.
if you guys would just let me know who will be there, I'll make sure we're there. Because we've got the commissioners spread out individually, so once they were done, if we didn't know, we would, so please let me know, and we'll plan to stay there.
Okay, great. Sheriff? Okay. All right, so Bill, Bruce, what do you think about, what do you think about making a motion to enter into negotiations with this location after we all tour today?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right,
I move that we enter into negotiations with the space at, was it 908 Ironwood?
980.
980 Ironwood Drive.
Bill Brooks,
Aye.
Commissioner Matari,
Aye.
Chair Duncan.
Aye, and that's contingent upon the tour today. All right. If that's all for PMR, except I think you had an open enrollment announcement, Sylvia.
Good morning, everybody. We wanted to give you an update, HR does, in terms of the 2024 open enrollment process. We are switching, actually we are live with a new benefit platform. We've gone from PlanSource to Employee Navigator. So what that's requiring us to do, everybody's information is in Employee Navigator, but everybody needs to go in, check their information. Any benefit eligible employee has to go through the process of selecting their benefits or declining benefits, and also checking your beneficiaries. Our open enrollment period is October 2nd through October 17th. It's about a 2-week window, and so we need your assistance in making sure all your employees go through that process as well. And communication will be coming out shortly. The other thing, we'll have some appointments. We'll have people in HR, and also AFLAC's going to help us with helping people enroll. So we'll go to solid waste, we'll go to the sheriff's office and any other sites that are hard to get them in here or don't have access to computers. So that's what HR will be working on.
Okay, thank you. Any questions about open enrollment?
We can only do it during these 2 weeks, right?
Yep.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, item 2, day after Thanksgiving hours. In the past, when we were fully staffed on day after Thanksgiving, we had parking situations and other things related to the parade. So I think the clerk's office and prosecutor's office, you guys will both be here the day after Thanksgiving. So had you considered offering vacation hours for people who wanted to leave early that day, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's just been standard practice that we still do that. And
Okay.
going forward, I think going forward to the recorder's office, because they still need to record titles on that June 19th date, next year we'll choose that to not take off for the recorder's office.
Okay. All right, so then the BOCC will put out a memo stating that, so are we wanting to make it mandatory? We do close the building at 3 and people take vacation if they want, or do you want the option to stay open till 5?
I think my office needs the option. We're
Okay.
dependent on the court schedule.
Yeah.
So that's usually what we do, is we monitor the court schedule, and as the day comes
I think
close to an end, 1, 2, 3 o'clock, there's less and less hearings, people start disappearing, but
Okay.
in the event that there's still hearings going on, we need the option to stay,
Okay.
open.
Your mic's not on, but I think, Jonathan, were you able to hear? Okay, so you're fine. Yeah.
Should I repeat some of that? Okay.
No, so we're good, so, okay. So
And same thing with us, because the district court,
Yep.
we typically have a skeleton crew on the next day after Thanksgiving, but
Okay.
they'll need to be there till 5.
We'll look at a previous memo then and get that back out. Okay. All right, anything else on that? All right, item 4, proposed step anniversary criteria, and unfortunately, the coroner, treasurer, and assessor are not with us this morning, so this might be a shorter discussion. So the last couple years, that that end of year bonuses were given out. We had criteria to receive the bonuses. And so that criteria has been brought forth to be applied to the step raises going forward. And so that's what we are here to discuss. And I will also say that we can make it retroactive to the previous 9 months, like we did with the bonuses. So, all right, I don't know. Do you want to start, Bruce, and we'll go around, or?
Well, I like the way it's set up right now with if you get one written reprimand, that would preclude you from getting your step. One of the things that we have done is we have tried to make correct the pay issues within the county. And one of the things that I've said is that if you pay people more, you should be able to demand more. The other thing is that if an employee gets a written reprimand, it's usually after they've been given verbal guidance. And the idea of an employee getting a written reprimand once a year and getting their step increase side by side with a very high-performing employee, I think is demoralizing to the high-performing employee. I also think that when you interview people, and this is now getting into my personal experiences, when you interview people, you want to make sure that they can listen to the questions that you're asking. And if you hire that person, they're expected to be able to understand and follow verbal direction. That when it gets to the point that you have to start writing documentation, written reprimands, things like that, that really is the beginning of the exit process in my mind. And I think the most effective tool any manager can have is to say, look, as an example, if you're showing up late, you've showed up late a little bit, don't show up late anymore, because if you do, I'm going to write you up and it's going to cost you a step. And I think that if someone can't follow that kind of verbal guidance, they probably should be written up, and it probably should be the beginning of the exit process if they are not able to correct their behavior. But it's not permanent, it's just for that year. And I think that it's only fair if we're going to ask the taxpayers to ensure that these steps are funded every year, that they are getting that those steps are given to the high-performing employees within the county government. So those are kind of my thoughts on that.
Okay, Bill?
I think we made a compact.
Oh, your microphone.
Yeah, I think we made a compact with the voters as well as with the employees by paying the way I believe we should. And at the same time, we have to not expect, but we have to demand performance. And in a gentle sort of way, but people should understand that it's not a maybe if I feel like it, it's required. But then that, it's incumbent upon us as elected officials to make sure that people are paid properly too. Goes hand in hand.
I would say I agree mostly with this policy. I did talk to another elected official. It says on here, no documentation, and then there is one bullet point that says no more than one written reprimand, so probably just need to clarify that first bullet point. But I think it's important that we do make sure that we are making sure people are performing and that it doesn't demoralize other people if someone isn't performing. And we take that step. So my understanding, we would document with a verbal warning. If the behavior continues, then we move on to probably a written reprimand, memorializing that we've talked to the individual. And then if it needs to be provided more training or a PIP, that would be in there too. And then from there, the elected official is the gatekeeper of that information to then give it to HR. I believe we check in probably once a year whether we have anyone on a written reprimand or written discipline performance improvement plan either.
Yes, and keep in mind the bonuses were for 12 months. This is only 9 months. So if somebody were to have, their anniversary date is September and they get written up in October, they're still going to be able to clear that 9 months before their step anniversary.
So why 9 months versus 12 with the bonuses?
That was just a request of one of the elected officials.
Okay.
Yeah, so is that something that you would want to go back to 12 months?
I don't think I care either way. It's just making sure that that we're documenting when we have to, and then making HR aware of it when it's appropriate.
Okay, so you'd be in favor of 0 written things, so it's just the
No,
verbal
that's just how the
warnings.
policy reads. So it says the beginning, no, the first bullet point, no documentation performance issues, and then the last bullet point within that first one is no more than one written. So
Right, but we've been going back and forth, so we originally said no written reprimands, but this document right here says 1 written reprimand. So my understanding is Commissioner Matari is 0 written.
0 written
So
reprimands.
do you want to change that within this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm fine, at that point, if you are writing it up and having the individual sign it, I think it's important because of ICRIM that you are documenting if you do have a verbal. But I think there is a difference between a verbal and documenting it and then a written reprimand. So I'm fine, for me, to say if there's 1 written reprimand where there's moralizing the information that you've been talking to them previously, that there'd be no step increase.
Okay, 9 months or 12?
I don't know the original difference of why it was 9 versus 12, I guess.
It was originally 12 and I got asked to change it.
Yeah, I think it should be 12.
Yeah.
Okay,
It just keeps it simpler.
it's fine. Just getting everybody's thoughts on this, so thank you, Jennifer. Stan?
Couple questions. I'm largely in support of this. I did want to clarify whether we're talking about 1 or none. I think we're talking about none at this point.
Correct.
I would agree with that with one point of clarification. The policy 430 for the county's performance and discipline, the disciplinary actions available include subsection B, written warnings or reprimands. I'm viewing those as different. And so if I choose to give somebody a written warning and it makes it into their file, That's different than a written reprimand. So a warning would not preclude somebody from getting a step increase, because the proposed draft here does not say warning, it says written reprimand. So I wanted to ask about that.
You know, this is part of a legacy policy where we're slicing and dicing all these different levels of basically the same type of disciplinary process. In my opinion, I think that should be revised. You give an employee a verbal direction and they don't follow that, your next step as a manager is to give a written document, in essence, for the same issue we're talking about. And at that point, you know, to me, that just says that the employee is not listening. And again, as a commissioner who has the ability to tax to fund the matrix, to fund these steps, I think it's only appropriate that our deal with the citizen is that, look, we gave this person verbal guidance. They chose not to listen. These are adults. And so I ended up writing up the person. Now, the difference between a warning and a reprimand, you know, I'm not quite sure I understand what that difference is, if it's written and it's in your employee file.
Well, I think it'd be up to the discretion of the supervisor, the elected, and so I'm a big fan of graduated discipline. I do believe we should handle things at the lowest level, unless it's some huge policy violation. I'm in support of, oral first. I do think there should be a distinction between a written warning, though, and a written reprimand. If the employer is going to have the ability to go from oral to written warning and then a written reprimand, and then it's no written reprimands or you lose your step, I'm in support of that. I do think there should be a difference between a warning and a reprimand.
Yeah, I think part of it too is just, what do you do for those high-performing people in your office? When they're sitting next to someone who is being told that they need to change their behavior, they don't. Then they get written up with a warning and they still don't, right? Okay, or they get their step next to that good employee. To me, it seems like that creates a much more difficult situation for our managers to figure out how to keep that high-performing employee challenged while they're sitting next to someone who doesn't perform at the same level, but they're both getting the steps. And so I would argue that maybe we should, kind of trim the written documentation from verbal, written, PIP, and not have this differentiation between a written warning, which I'm not sure I understand how that's going to change anything with your employee after you verbally explain to them that they're not following policy.
And I'm in support of whatever the board decides. I just wanted to avoid future issues.
Yeah,
Because somebody's going to bring it up that, hey, I was only warned, I wasn't given, it was a written warning, not a written reprimand. And then this is something we could have talked about today. So I'm fine with it either way.
I think it's a good point, and we should clarify that. I mean, obviously, we have a lot of different policy. I don't know, Sylvia, do you have any thoughts on that?
And also, we're talking about things that make it into somebody's file, because an email to somebody, I don't think should be counted as a written warning or reprimand for purposes of docking somebody's step increase.
No, this is an employee file.
Okay.
Sure.
Absolutely, and we'll just need to clarify policy. The policies are now under review, and based on the board's decision of how they want to handle this and the whole change to our comp policy and giving steps and so forth, so we have to totally revamp it. We're going to have to rewrite that policy 430 and the written reprimand. It's really formal documentation in the employee's file of their actions. You've done that verbal, you've given those warnings, and the written reprimand is the next step.
I mean, an email with a follow-up on a verbal warning is just as sufficient as far as documenting the verbal warning. And then, of course, the written would be something that the employee would actually be signing, or at least expected to sign. Is that correct?
Yes.
So wait,
So-
Do you recommend just some of the ICRIM trainings we went through, even if you do a verbal, you would say that it's a verbal warning in the documentation, but would you still have them initial it so they, I guess, distinguish that I gave you a verbal warning, it's still in writing, and the next one is the reprimand?
I would have them initial it because in that if you follow up on that verbal warning and you're saying, we discussed this, here's the follow-up, here's our expectations, then they've signed off and acknowledged that they received that verbal warning and what your expectations
So
are.
maybe within the first documentation, you're saying that it's a verbal warning, that we spoke about it. The next one could lead to the reprimand, which could cause, which will cause, if this policy goes through, that there'll be no step increase for that year.
Yes.
May I weigh in before we start talking about policy and what have you? Is that this is going to drastically change a philosophy that we brought to the sheriff's office. That we bring a philosophy that if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And we have changed that culture that, yes, I know that these things have gone undocumented for decades and years, but now we're going to give you what we call as a performance log entry, that, hey, we have told you time and time again about your activities on social media, so we're going to give you a copy of the policy. We're going to sit down with a supervisor. We're going to say, hey, don't do that again. And then from there, we go to another step. What I believe the board is likely going to happen is that, well, let me back up. We're a little bit different because we're for cause. I believe every other department here is at will. Is that true? So we bring a philosophy that, hey, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So we document, I would say, 10 times more than what we did before I came into office. There's no such thing as a verbal warning. We don't give verbal warnings because if it's our attorneys in the past have told me if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And for for-cause employees, you have to be able to document the change in behavior that you wanted. I'm afraid that you're just going to force us to dumb down the policy and say, okay, we'll give them, half a dozen warnings.
I actually disagree because we've actually given you a more effective tool if you really think about it, okay? First of all, you said that we've talked to an employee and time again, they have a social media, they're doing something with their social media that they shouldn't be doing. Well, what I just heard is that you've explained something to someone on multiple occasions that they're putting things on social media they shouldn't, okay? So that in and of itself is a problem. They're not listening to you. Two, if they don't get their step increase, that probably will be the most effective way to either separate that person out of the sheriff's office because they'll probably want to leave because they're not getting their step, because they're not listening to you to begin with. And then, of course, the other people who are there who do listen will see that it's very intolerant, that poor performers don't get rewarded financially. The other side to this is that I'm willing to bet that for the first person who ends up getting this written documentation that will preclude them from getting a step, it'll send a message to everyone else that you're very serious about this. And it's actually, I think, going to be a more effective tool. Because my personal experience has been that when you have to repeat yourself over and over and over again with a person, you're really, they're not following your direction. There's really a bigger issue going on here, and that the writing process is the beginning of the exit process. But rewarding people while you're writing them up, to me, it just seems like it's too much. It's just too much. And all you're doing is you're not taking away your ability to write people up. What you're basically telling people is you're not going to be rewarded financially if you continue this behavior, because I will write you up. And I think you can follow up with all your verbal warnings with emails and just say, here's, we talked about this today. I'm following up in writing, but it's not going, it's not a written warning. And just please reply that you acknowledge this.
And we acknowledge a written reprimand as a formal investigation where the employee has an opportunity to see the evidence. I mean, this is not a quick process. That's a formal written reprimand. But we use other written documents way before that. But are we saying that the written change in what we call a performance log entry, would that be considered a written reprimand?
I don't believe so.
Sheriff Norris, isn't it with the sheriff's office, you have a due process where if someone does not get a step increase, they can have, it's a due
Sure,
process.
sure.
So how is that different? Is going to be treated with his office? So if someone does not get a step, they have the ability to go before a panel, I'm assuming.
I don't know if the sheriff's office allows dispute on pay.
I don't,
It would be a demotion. You would be able to say, hey, what's going on?
But isn't there, I mean, in the philosophy of double jeopardy, if I'm giving a written reprimand, and in addition to the written reprimand, oh, but guess what? You're also going to lose a step. In the philosophy of double jeopardy for for-cause employees,
Well, you're not losing a step, you're just not gaining a step, and that's different. You're not going backwards, you're just not going
but it's still
forward.
monetary.
Well, that's right, it's,
They're gonna be able to argue that, hey, I'm still being punished. In addition to what I was punished for, I'm also not doing that. So,
then how would you propose not rewarding people who can't follow verbal direction?
we've,
How would you propose us memorializing that as a policy for your office?
I believe that if you put a larger policy saying that no employee shall receive a step that has been suspended for 5 or more days. Each elected official may have a more stringent policy for their own department. But you can't have a more lenient policy for it. And then you allow the electeds to be able to say, okay, this, and this, but if anybody has 5 days suspension or more, we've had to change behavior. And I believe that, and are you also saying that past behavior, past discipline would also not allow them to get a step?
It's just these past 12 months.
12-month period.
Now, Mr. Attorney, how is that not a philosophy of double jeopardy? Now they didn't know they were going to also lose a step?
It would begin this year, it wouldn't go back retroactively.
Okay, it would not. I
thought there was a comment about retroactive at the beginning.
There
of the meeting.
is, it
Well,
is, yeah.
I don't think you
So-
should do that necessarily.
Well,
I'm not in support of a retroactive policy. I think putting people on notice should be the way to do things. But back to my argument, I don't mean to cut into the sheriff, but words have meaning. There's a warning and a reprimand. Written warning, written reprimand. There's no point, if we can't distinguish between the two, then why have two options? And
so that's why we'll clean up the policy.
Well, so that brings up a point. Is there even any point? Because even if the policy strikes the word warning and just says written reprimand, if I'm calling something a written warning, it's still outside the purview of the policy. And so, I mean, there's a difference between warning and reprimand. The question is a written warning going to preclude somebody from getting a step increase?
So give us an example of where you would use a warning versus reprimand.
Again, graduated discipline. If there's an issue, I orally warn somebody. If that doesn't work, then we move to a written warning. If that doesn't work, then it's a written reprimand, kind of like 3 strikes and you're out. So at that 3rd strike, then you're losing your step increase. And again, the only reason why I bring this up is because it's already in policy, written warning or reprimand, that there has to be a difference between the two.
Well,
Otherwise, what guidance does the supervisor have in picking one over the other?
I mean, part of this is a, performance pay model. I mean, that's part of this, is that, you come in to an employer and you do a really good job, and in exchange, you can count on the step. I mean, that's one of the issues that's happened in the past, is that we have this matrix, or we have this chart where people look at it and they go, okay, so I'm at this level, and in 5 years I should be over here, right? And there's an expectation of that. And what's happened in the past is that that has not been funded. And so it has led to what I would, if I were in someone's shoes, I'd be quite disappointed because I had this expectation. It's what drew me in to work for the county. And then it doesn't get funded. So I think what we're trying to say here, or what we're trying to accomplish, is that you come in and this is the deal that the county is making with the employee, but we expect you to be a high performer. And if you're not a high performer, then you're not going to get these steps as expected. So where is that line that determines where a high performer is? If you want to have a written warning and a written reprimand, I would argue it should be on the warning, because you've already exhausted your verbal warnings. And at that point, if you have an employee that can't follow direction, I'm not so sure that it makes sense to reward them with a step increase. That's kind of where I'm coming from with it, because again, the county commissioners are the ones that go to the citizen and say, you know, we're gonna need to increase property taxes to fund this matrix. And because that's the promise we're making to the employees. But in exchange, I think it's only fair that we say, look, these are your high-performing employees who are getting these automatic step increases. So really what it is it's up to the employee. It's not up to us to figure out whether they should be entitled to the step increase. It's actually up to the employee through their own performance to decide whether or not they're entitled to that step increase.
And I totally agree with you. My point is that if a warning and a reprimand are the same thing, as the employer,
Then make it the warning.
what's the, if there's no difference between the two, what guidance does the supervisor have in picking one over the other? That's what I'm trying to point out.
Then let's make it both.
And if that's what the board decides, then that's what we have to operate under. I'm just saying, words mean something.
Make it the same.
There's clearly a difference between warning and reprimand, otherwise they both wouldn't be on there with the or in between them. And as a supervisor, deciding which option to pursue with your employee, what's the difference in picking one over the other if they have the same end result? That's what I'm asking.
Well, the difference, I would assume, would be the ICRIMP requirements.
Commissioner, if I may add just one thing, for law enforcement, not try to speak separately, but being paramilitary, we have the first we ask, then we tell, then we make. We verbalize it. Please don't do that anymore. I put it in a written, I was told, you've been told not to do this, and then we do an investigation and we discipline them with a written reprimand. I forgive the phrase, we're handcuffing ourselves a little bit, because in the field or in the paramilitary that we live in, I should be enough just to tell you not to do something. Then if it's not, it rises to the fact that I'm putting in the fact that I told you on this date or previously, and now I'm putting in writing, if you will, more of a bite. Then if we have a issue with that, then we go to the, as the sheriff was alluding to, an investigation, and then it's a full-blown, and it's a written reprimand. I'm okay with the written reprimand, whatever the county policy wants to stand. I think it's just far easier to, you're somewhat taking our ability at a frontline supervisor to say, don't do it again, and then put it progressively as the prosecutor is speaking to, progressive discipline, to go from a verbal counseling, a verbal demand, if you will, to a written, then to a written reprimand. I would just ask for that consideration, to have that progressive discipline in consideration.
So documenting the verbal is not what we're talking about here. So you can document the verbal, and that's not a problem. So it's where it goes to that next step where they did not obey the verbal. So now what you're saying is that the deputies deserve more chances than all the other employees.
I'm not. I'm asking for if I would consider this for the entire county. I'm just saying, the way, this being my 31st year, I've gone through progressive discipline. First I ask you, please don't do X. Great. If I don't, then it goes to a written documentation that you were told once before, and here it is, signed,
Right.
and then it proceeds. I understand the county.
But we do work in a different environment in some cases than, you know, Ms. Duncan, if you want to dismiss what I have to say with your facial expressions, then why do I even say anything? You know what? I'm not going to say anything, because you've already made up your mind.
this on tomorrow's agenda for approval?
Yes, because it was only discussion.
Yeah.
So I can get some history from Darren on what was meant by warning. I think it's just words, or reprimand. Get some history from Darren, and we can bring it to the HR meeting tomorrow.
Just out of curiosity, how many written warnings, reprimands, whatever, does ICRIM require before you can terminate an employee?
So it depends on the severity of the issue, of the, whatever they have done wrong. So they like to see a verbal, they'd like to see if it's progressive, a written reprimand, and then sometimes it just goes to a performance improvement plan. A lot of times it goes to that, and then there's issues that might trigger a last chance agreement. If they're not performing in a performance improvement plan, there's times we go to ICRIM and say, they're not meeting the expectations of the job, the essential functions, and we request termination. And usually they concur with us. So I haven't ever seen a written warning process come through.
Yeah. So there's nothing to preclude any manager from saying, we talked about this, about you showing up late. I'm going to give you one last chance. Don't show up late again. Otherwise, I'll have to write you up and it'll cost you a step. So there's nothing that precludes a manager from talking to an employee 2 times if they want to. That what this really comes down to is that, and the way I see it, is that the manager has exhausted their options verbally at this point. And again, just from my experience, when you've exhausted the verbal options, you're going to writing because now this person cannot follow direction. And rewarding them with a step, to me, seems a little too much if a manager has said, you're not supposed to show up late. If you show up late again, I'm going to write you up and it's going to cost you a step. And then they still show up late. That seems a little excessive to me. And there's lots of ways to deal with folks that don't want to follow direction. But I believe that when you start to write them up, that is the beginning process. And if they have an opportunity to appeal, they can appeal. But if there's, again, 2 verbal warnings that a manager makes notes, on this date, I told this employee that they were late and they showed up late. And on this date, I explained to this employee that if they showed up late again, that I would write them up and it would cost them a step. If that's documented somewhere by the manager, any kind of due process that would occur, I think would be.
So Commissioner, you're saying to document the verbal conversation?
It's up to the manager. But, usually it's worth at least noting when you speak to an employee and give them direction, because on occasion you get people who say, oh, I don't remember you telling me that. Well, actually on this date, I did say this to you.
So documentation is not considered written reprimand or written warning. It's documentation, which is, maybe a subtle difference, but it's saying that on this date we had this conversation, but it's not rising to the level of the reprimand. So your performance logs, those are not written reprimands. Those are the documentation of that conversation. Does that make sense?
I just have one last thing to say, and I appreciate everybody's time. I don't believe I have any employees that would be subject to this. My inquiries are merely in the future, if an employee is ever subject to this and there's a challenge, and then in the future we're arguing over words and policy, I'm just trying to anticipate. And this is what we do as lawyers, right? And so I'm not trying to argue. I'm just trying to peer into the future and avoid potential issues. That's all.
Well, I think if anything, one of the beauties about developing policy is that if something doesn't work right, we always have the option to modify. I would be anxious to see how a policy like this works, because I think in the end, I think managers will discover it will lead to way more efficient and productive employees. I truly believe that. And if for some reason, any particular elected official has a problem where not enough discipline is occurring, too much discipline is occurring, too many issues with the steps and all that, I'm happy to revisit it. But I'd like to know the details of what is behind what's happening with that. But my take on it is that I think with one good verbal warning that if I have to write you up, this will cost you a step, and the employee is clear of that understanding, I would be surprised if you had the same continued behavior. I'd really be surprised.
And if I may clarify what the clerk was asking, they have a due process, but it's through the discipline. We wouldn't handle the pay step. That would be, I'm assuming, to go through HR, because the discipline would set the fact that they're not getting it. If they want to contest it, they could go through HR, I would assume, for the policy itself, because I would have the due process of them coming forth and explaining or contesting the discipline, which would in turn cause them to lose a step, but I believe would go to HR because it's a policy matter.
I mean, let me ask you, have you ever had an employee not sign a written warning?
I did that
Sure.
when I was a
Okay.
sheriff's deputy.
So what good is having a written warning if it's not signed by the
You
employee?
have somebody witness it.
You know, and so can you not have somebody witness a verbal warning too?
Sure.
Okay, so I mean, the point is that, a cooperative employee will do what they should do, and an uncooperative one won't sign things, won't follow direction, and things like that. I think that there are lots of ways to address this issue, but I truly believe that you'll discover that this will be a tool set that'll be much more effective than writing employees up and so forth, because the people who really care will listen, and the people who don't care, I guess you have to start to question how important they are inside the organization if they're not willing to listen.
Commissioner, if I may too, I think the one thing that we definitively need to reach out to is Darren for ICRIM, because in the past year and a half, I've had my hands full with several of them, and Darren has alluded to the fact, well, it hasn't met that threshold yet. We have to give them another opportunity. We haven't met this threshold. And you talk about the exit process, because I can tell you there has been a few that I believe were at that threshold. We've already walked through the doorway, if you will, but Darren's like, no, ICRAMP won't even consider it. Darren won't, and it's very unfortunate, because I came from, we didn't have an ICRAMP. So understanding that you have an assurance agent or company that has to buy in on your efforts to deal and discipline an employee is sometimes unnerving to me, because it's black and white, it seems, but there is a definitive shade of gray where ICRIMP comes in and says, okay, you've met that threshold. So I think it's important that Darren is to speak on that.
And Darren has seen this criteria and didn't have any legal concerns with it, and we could even look at the 12 months, like if the board said we're doing it right immediately, we can. We look back 12 months, and that's when the clock started. So that is an option we can do.
Darren said that it's okay to go back 12 months.
Yep.
The only other thing, I do believe it should apply for 12 months, not 9. I think that would be unfair to apply to people. Some, because of their date, would be able to avoid this, form of losing your step, and it wouldn't be fair to others because of the date they fall on. So I would support 12 months rather than 9. And I realize what Darren says about retroactive, but I just disagree. I believe in giving employees as much notice as possible. I think that it should start once it's implemented. That's my opinion.
So I guess we didn't do that with the 2 years of bonuses. So that would be my only thing, is we would be doing something different now if we did that. And I understand, I guess it goes back to Bruce's point, though. It's like, if you verbally warn this person and now you've had to write them up, I mean, so I would find it hard to believe that an employee would be like, okay, you verbally warned me, I'm gonna ignore that because I'm still gonna get a raise, but I might listen to you if I'm not gonna get a raise. So I guess that's where I would kind of be concerned, is like,
Yeah, as far as the retroactive component, I don't, because this is a different policy altogether and it's not bonuses, I would be more inclined to have whatever occurred in the previous 12 months not affect that everyone kind of starts with a clean slate. But moving forward, it would be very clear.
what about performance plans?
Performance improvement plans?
Yeah, performance improvement plans. So if somebody's on a current performance improvement plan, they're gonna go ahead and get their raise.
That's the problem. There's always
Yes.
those tiny little things.
Welcome to government.
And that's something that's gonna be obviously reported to HR, right? So it's the elected official saying this person's on a PIP, right?
Right, what we would do is ask when their anniversary date's approaching, is this employee eligible? Do they meet the criteria of receiving the step? And you would communicate that to HR, then we'd submit it to payroll.
Wouldn't it depend if there's a performance plan that included discipline? Then I would say it would apply, but if the performance plan did not include discipline, then it does not apply. Because we have we have voluntary performance plans. We have involuntary performance plans.
It'd be the involuntary. I thought your voluntary performance plans were like career planning.
Career development,
They're not really like, you're deficient in this area of your work, you need to do this.
it could apply to that. We have some situations where an employee is put on our radar and saying, hey, something's, not really, you're not the same person you were 6 months ago. What's going on? Here's what I'd like for you to do.
I mean, I hate to say this, but the little things, the voluntary performance improvement plan, and a written reprimand, I really wouldn't want to hold that against someone for the last 12 months if they're doing well. But the other ones, suspension without pay, involuntary demotion, last chance agreement, I don't see how you can give somebody a step increase during the last chance agreement. I mean,
Okay, so then for the FY '24 year, if they have a performance plan or a written reprimand, they will go ahead and get their step. But nobody with the last chance agreement, involuntary demotion, and suspension without pay would get their FY '24 step. But then moving forward for FY '25, they could no longer have a performance plan or a written reprimand. Is that my understanding?
yes.
Okay, Bill? Okay. Jennifer?
I'm fine with that.
Okay, Stan?
Could you repeat that one more time? I apologize.
So just for FY '24, they could have a performance plan and they could have a written reprimand for their FY '24 step. But going forward to FY '25, they could not have any of those 5 items.
I agree with you if by that you mean anything that was set into motion prior to October 1st or September 25th, whatever the date is.
That was
Yes.
my question. So you're saying when we start the year, if they're already on a PIP or one of those categories, that doesn't disqualify them. But if at new FY '24, if they enter into a PIP, that disqualifies them. If they enter into that
No.
during FY '24.
If you're on a last chance agreement right now,
You're not going to get a step.
you're not going to get a step.
But if you're on a PIP right now in FY '23, you're gonna get your step in FY '24. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah.
But
So
if they go into a PIP in FY '24, they don't get the
if it's
anniversary
within
step,
12 months of their
Right.
anniversary.
which
yeah.
it would be, if it's in FY '24.
What if their anniversary date, they get it, so they get a PIP October 1st, their anniversary is December? Are you
That would
saying,
take them, they wouldn't get
are
their
they
step.
out of it,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
is that really giving them?
Give that example again.
Okay, so October 1, they get their performance plan. October 8th is their anniversary.
Mm-hmm,
So they would not get it. They would not get their step.
yeah.
I'm okay.
Because they entered that PIP in FY '24.
And if I may clarify, not to mix this up, but I have 2 sitting right now. I just signed a last chance agreement was sent out and the employee signed it. And then I have probably a written reprimand that's gonna come before the 24th, if not October 1st. So if I'm hearing you correctly, we're going forward from there. So because it's this year, they're not gonna,
No,
they're,
last chances are forget it.
last chance, I got
But,
that.
yeah, but the reprimand, correct, if the reprimand happened, I guess, in FY
For
'23.
24, but then in 25 going forward, I'm just trying to set the ground rules, like we're saying, so we're not going backwards when we're changing everything. So I'm just trying to gain understanding so I can explain that.
So if you did a PIP, my understanding, before October 1st, they're fine. Now, if you do it after October 1st, then that
Then
will
they're not
affect
gonna
their
get the
Right,
anniversary
and the
step.
last chance, because they just got
Yeah.
it, they're out for 24. But if I have someone that gets a written reprimand tomorrow for fiscal 24,
Tomorrow, they're fine.
right, up
It's
to the
Oc-
24th of the first.
October
October
1st. We'll
1st.
do
Okay.
the
Yeah.
fiscal year.
Okay,
Yeah.
October 1. And
okay.
if they get one October 1 and their anniversary date was October 8, they're not eligible.
I would certainly like to argue for at least one written reprimand, but
Let me ask you, what do you see as the downside right now? Like, how is this gonna create, chaos within your
oh
organization?
no, we're just, we're going to rotate things to what we call a performance log entry. And so.
I'm sorry, to a what?
To a performance log entry. Not disciplinary and in nature, just, hey, you know what? On such and such date, we talked about leaving a prisoner's property on top of your car while responding to a baby not breathing call. You can't do that. And now we got a claim of, $200. Well, it was a rapidly evolving situation. I wanted to get the baby not breathing call, so I accidentally left the property on top of my car. There are some things that are significant in nature that, you know what, maybe not a verbal warning or a performance log entry, maybe sometimes we jump to a written reprimand or 3 days off because of the nature of it. But it was a mistake of the heart, not a mistake of the mind. We divide discipline into two different categories. Was it a mistake of the heart, or was it a mistake of the mind? So we do bring a philosophy that, hey, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So we try to document many things. And I believe, based on our next subject, we've done a pretty damn good job over the last 2 years compared to the sheriff's office previously. And I believe that the separations that we've had have not resulted in any type of tort. So we do bring that philosophy that, we need to document, but I don't want to, I want to have that ability to be able to say, you know what, you probably shouldn't have done that here. You're also going to lose a step. And leave it to the responsibility of the elected official to manage their people.
The issue here is that, it's not just you, it's also the county, the Board of County Commissioners that has to fund these things. And so we have to work together on it. Now, the thing about it is that there's a difference between someone who makes a mistake and someone who doesn't follow direction or doesn't follow policy. Okay. In essence, if you're not following direction and you're not following policy, you should not be rewarded financially. In my eyes, I don't see how you can justify rewarding somebody financially for not following direction or policy. So, where is that line? And that line, the proposed line is starting off with written documentation, where you're seeking a signature from an employee. Now, is that the perfect line? Well, we're going to find out. Nothing is absolutely permanent when it comes to these policies. But I truly believe that a good manager who says, listen, I've talked to you about this before, and if you do this again, I'm going to write you up, and it's going to cost you a step, will get you much faster corrective behavior than going through this continuous, escalation up to a second or written acknowledgement, if you will.
So, but we just deal in different situations. We deal with an overcrowded jail where we're understaffed. And if we have X amount of releases going out, and there's supposed to be a process for these releases, and somebody let a release out, an inmate out accidentally, but we were able to catch that inmate before they got down the street, maybe at a nearby burger joint. That's pretty significant. That would rise the occasion. I don't think a verbal's enough. I don't think a written enough. I think, hey, I think I need to get your attention on this, that we have a process here. And although he was, if this was a true event, he was trying to do what was best to get the inmate released, but it was significant enough where, hey, we need to get your attention and you need to follow this policy because of this. But it wasn't that he intentionally didn't want to follow the policy. It was just that, hey, he was in a hurry, and it was busy, and we had to go at a medical event and another pod. And these are mitigating circumstances that we take into consideration. So sometimes we deal with not only for-cause employees, but we deal with dynamic situations that require getting somebody's attention, even if it was a mistake of the heart.
If I may add, just for consideration, I've given out 5 written reprimands over the last year. Months ago, 9-10 months ago, up to last week. So I think I would just ask for consideration that we're changing the rules, if you will, in the 11th hour without going forward. I'm just wondering why we couldn't go forward from October 1st.
We are, for
Okay.
written reprimands, not for last chance, voluntary demotion, or suspension.
Okay.
Or how about for incidents occurred? How about for incidents occurred during, because the disciplinary process might be
Dragged
after
out. That was going to be my next thing. So it started in this fiscal year, but it draws out into the next. My other question for you, and this is just for clarification, COLA. This isn't affecting COLA?
No.
Okay.
Nope, does not affect.
So
the
can we say for incidents occurring prior to, even though the process might take
There'll
us?
be a memo,
Okay.
yeah.
No, I understand completely. I do. And I think the hard part is just trying to draw that line where you are rewarding your high-performing employees and not rewarding employees who are not high-performing and who are getting written up, and putting them in the same category. And that's where I think, everyone has a little bit of a different situation, and I understand that. But if someone accidentally were to let out an inmate, I'm trying to, in my mind, I'm trying to figure out how I could justify giving them their step increase, along with someone who is, highly attention-oriented when it comes to that kind of stuff. Like, what happened? Where was the failure? Was it a policy failure? Was it an overtime failure? Where was that? And I think understanding that better could help. But for that particular example, I'm having a little bit of a hard time understanding how that person should be rewarded with a step increase automatically by making that big of a mistake. But this is something that I'm certainly open to revisiting. Document your situations, and then let's take a look at it. If it's that oppressive in essence for you to be able to do your job with your employees, then we should have a conversation. But as far as funding a matrix year in and year out, the last thing I'd like to see is a poor performing employee who can't follow verbal direction, needs to be written up, and rewarding them alongside with your best performing employees. And that's what my big fear is. If I'm going to go to bat to the citizens and say, look, we need to fund this matrix, and we're going to ask for your help to do that.
Okay. with that, we'll be addressing this again tomorrow for an action item, and we'll have the changes made and brought forward, and hopefully a draft memo by tomorrow to indicate to the sheriff's point, when these incidents occurred, in which fiscal year. So we can do that. Bring this up tomorrow. All right. Item 5, elected officials pay policy. So I just jotted down a couple thoughts that we can work together and go forward on. I think addressing elected officials' pay separate from COLA should happen every 2 years, because we have elections happening. And so making it in the fiscal year when the new person is going to take office, I think making it on those fiscal years, if that makes sense. So FY '25, we will see potentially new set of county electeds. And so the the elected official salary would go into effect for FY '25.
And when would that be, when would the salary be determined? And then what is the pause between when it's determined and when it actually goes into effect?
So it usually goes into effect on anniversary dates. So that's,
October, for electeds, it's usually October 1
so it's not going to be on our anniversary
in
dates.
anniversary.
No, the
Okay.
resolution that you guys signed was effective as of 9/24, like the rest of the county.
Okay, so that's fine. It can just be the beginning of the fiscal year. And then COLA.
Can I make a
wouldn't
point to
matter.
that situation that happened in Canyon County? I think it was last year. So if commissioners or other people are going out, I think that board decided to take back some of the commissioners' pay, and somehow, and when the new commissioners came in, they reset the pay. So if people aren't coming back and they decide to set it for the future board or future electeds, how, we had a situation in Canyon County happen like that.
I know, but we can't prevent that anyway. If we give elected officials raises every single year, we can't prevent that. Does that make sense?
Yes, but you're saying basically you would set that in you would set it in going into fiscal year '25, but the board going out, maybe 1 or 2 commissioners in '24 are setting that policy at that time. And I'm just giving you an example of what happened in
Right.
Canyon County at that point.
Yeah, no, I'm very well aware of that situation. But it would be determined on outside controls. So maybe not quite a committee like we had before, that seemed cumbersome, but could be tied to judges' raises or something to that effect. I could have some trigger, and this is just thoughts being thrown out here. But there would be a trigger for it. And then, we'd have to set I don't know if we'd want to set it in policy where we're getting that information. If we would just set it the top 5 counties and average those, or, what we want to do.
What's wrong with the recommendation of 3% behind Canyon County? For example, we run a larger sheriff's office than Canyon County does. We have twice as many square miles as Canyon County does. That there could be an argument that it should be more, but I think the argument is that from a population standpoint, we're about 40,000 people less, but that seems to be a decent measurable.
Well, then Canyon County commissioners just cut their pay, so do our commissioners get their pay
No,
cut then?
the board in '23 cut it before the board coming in '24.
Right.
I think there was 2 new commissioners coming in. And so I believe they restored, when the new commissioners came
They
in, they
did.
restored it in '24. But I would say, I would talk to and reach out to other counties, how they set policies. I know like in Twin Falls, I talked to the clerk there. They do a combination of counties, including Ada and Canyon, and actually they end up paying more they had in the past in Kootenai County, and they're the 5th largest county. But they typically will go to an increase based on if they give the employees a 3% increase, they'll do a 3% increase. But it's probably finding that market, and then they go, I think Ada County did a $1 per hour, 2,080, plus a 3% increase of COLA, and they applied that to the electeds and to the employees. Canyon County just did a 3% increase, and they applied that to the employees and to the elected. So I think maybe discussing with other counties how they come up with their policy and why they do what they do is probably relevant too, being that there's similar responsibility and duties.
I agree, and Canyon County could be the model, you know, but it is kind of interesting when you look at the other counties, because like Jennifer was saying, the Twin Falls uses the top 3 counties and averages them, but they're significantly smaller. And then you've got Bonner, for example, like what is their policy? How did they come about, you know, changing their pay over the years? And so I think part of the challenge is the fact that some of these other counties don't have a solid policy. If we look at it compared to other counties, the question is, what's the variable that we want to use to drive it? Is it going to be the population, the square miles, the size of the budget, the number of employees, you know, things like that? And I've looked at them a couple different ways, and they just come out kind of, they're not really correlated, so to speak, when you look at the general size of the counties throughout the state. So I'm happy to have a discussion on it, and it could end up being Canyon that we just look at, you know, and maybe have a backup in case the county commissioners decide to cut their pay to 0 for a year or two, and we don't really want to follow that necessarily. But there is little rhyme or reason that I've been able to identify when you look at the different counties and how they establish their pay.
Do we consider cost of living? Because the cost of living in Kootenai County is much higher than it is in some of the other counties.
Well, that's another variable, you know, and we just have to prioritize how we want to do that. I mean, we could make it the median home price as an example, as a driver for this. You know, so it's just a matter of what you want. I think what's going to make it a little bit challenging for us is the fact that if we have this new automatic steps for the employees, we're looking at doing a COLA every 2 to 3 years to adjust the matrix. And so if we're doing that every 2 or 3 years, how does that affect elected officials in between the elections? And so, you know, again, it's like squeezing the balloon. You do something over here, it changes something on this end.
I agree with that, because if, you know, there have been times, and I think there will be in the future, where employees will make more than their elected head. And I think that should be avoided. We have good county employees, and a lot of them aspire to lead a department someday. But I don't think we're going to get that breed of experience wanting to lead if they're going to make more money without becoming the supervisor or the elected. And so I do think that the elected should make more than their employees. But if the employees are getting raises every year and we're not increasing elected raises, you're going to have some employees eclipsing what the electeds make. And I don't think I don't think that's the situation we should be in. And so I think whatever we decide, it should be done as often as all other employees are evaluated for increases.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to state a little history. I did a little research. So for Kootenai County, and I just looked at the commissioners, from 2010, 11, and 12, they did not move for pay. And then there was an increase in 2013, and that continued on for the same amount for 7 years. So there was no movement for at least the commissioners for 7 years, and one time 3 years. So it became stagnant. And you'll see kind of when you take the Ada, Canyon, Kootenai, Bonneville, Twin Falls, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then Bonner, who's number 8, we actually fell below all those counties in pay because I think of that. So there is something to consider, and most counties are not on Matrix 2 like we are. They do just the COLA like Ada did in Canyon, and then they do the increase based on what they do for their employees, for the electeds.
Yeah, and that policy, we want to include basically 3 main components. The first one is what triggers us to look at the policy. So it could be every 2 years, for example, like what Commissioner Duncan said. What is the methodology for determining the pay? You know, is it cost of living here? Is it Canyon County? What is that methodology? And then the third one is, what is the criteria that must be met in order for us to implement that? Because I would argue that we should be ensuring that all the county operations and employees are taken care of first. And with that said, then we can look at ourselves and make that adjustment. But those are the three things that I think we just have to look at incorporating into the policy. And the methodology, I think, is going to be a little bit of a challenge, but I think we can figure it out.
You want to work on that?
Oh, I'll play around with it and come up with a few different ideas and see what makes sense.
All right.
I think it's a much more, for the top elected officials in the county, especially the commissioners, it's a much more organic thing. It can't be policyized, so we go up, 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 up. Therefore, I think you have to take accountability for what you set in terms of salary, and you have to take accountability from the voters quickly, because that's where it comes. And explaining that we met the first, second, third, and fourth criteria, therefore, there are raises that people should get is not gonna fly. Wouldn't fly with me.
Well, I think it depends on the criteria.
Well, I don't think you're gonna have criteria that take into account the organicness of this office.
And I don't think you have to raise it either. I mean, yeah, we have a policy in place, but you can also just say, okay, well, this year we're not doing it and then state the reasons why.
Well, that's the third component of it, that we're not able to properly take care of our employees. The money is needed for operations,
Recession
things
or
like that. So
whatever.
it's not automatic.
Right.
It's just saying that we've met all these other criteria first, and then it's up to us to decide whether to take it.
How about the other side of that, that these criteria have been met and we should have a decrease?
The methodology will determine that.
I know, but
That's
that's what
the
I'm
key.
saying is, if you do the increase side, you should do the decrease side.
Well, that's what the methodology
Okay,
would address.
all right, I just didn't hear that.
Yeah.
So, also I would point out that I don't think elected officials should make more than some of their employees. Some of their employees require degrees and all kinds of experience and pretty complicated stuff. I mean, I don't think commissioners should make more than our IT, guy. I mean, that would break the bank. So we'll have to figure out, that aspect of it too. So I don't think it's a blanket statement where you just say elected officials make more than their employees. I don't think that's,
We had
That's right.
one deputy who shall go nameless. And I said, why don't you apply for that job?
You mean run for office?
I said, not apply,
No.
be appointed to. And he said, why would I want to do that? The salary's less, and then I have to run for office every 4 years. And I went,
but there's also an argument about chief deputies in operations and what is the role of the elected official, and that's to protect rights and to provide a good service. So once again, just a lot of things to think about when we're moving forward on this vein.
Well, I would argue where the prosecutor is on this, that the elected official, and especially sheriff and prosecutor and all electeds, that we serve in a pretty conservative community, and we're seeing lawfare with sheriffs and prosecutors across this country. We have to run for office. We have to spend our own money to run for office. We have to endure some of those things that employees don't have to. That would be supporting Stan's argument on why, some of the reasons why the elected should make more than.
Yeah, well, I think it varies depending on the elected official. I mean, I agree on the county commissioner side, because we're kind of the three-headed hydra here. So it's really three salaries for largely one body. But for, the other positions, I can see where that makes complete sense. So I agree with you on that.
All right, are we good with that one? Bruce will do something and bring something back. And in my mind, if we get it set by March, I think that'd be sufficient, so,
Yeah, there's nothing imminent here.
correct. Yep. So I will go ahead and I'll just say a brief thing about item 3, the iCrimp presentation and update. But I'd like to, when more elected officials here, and essentially what I want to get out of it is the state of insurance today and what we need to do as elected officials and on our manager level to manage risk. So Kootenai County is in fairly good shape, but the insurance industry is not. So there's some other things that I want to look at too. Our property deductible's gone from $3,500 to $7,000. So that's pretty expensive endeavor. So we'll just, I'll give this presentation in October at the elected officials meeting, and hopefully we'll get all the elected officials in attendance. So go ahead and read over these things. If you guys have any questions in between there, let me know. But we've already started doing some things to lower our risk, and that's pretty good. I mean, specifically, the Sheriff's Department is utilizing iCrimp's training, which is fantastic. So, all right. With that, anything else? We have no public today. Anybody online? Nobody online. All right, 10:17. Thank you all.